Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 9 of Jungian Ever After, a podcast about myths and fairy tales through the lens of Jungian analysis. I am your host, Reza, and joining me as always is my co-host and Jungian analyst, Dr. Adina Davidson. So, Adina, we had planned on covering Demeter and Persephone next, but the timing just didn't quite work out. Why don't you tell the listeners why we've interrupted our parenting series?
I actually had forgotten that we were going to do Demeter and Persephone next. But last winter, Reza and I were both really excited to hear that Christopher Nolan was planning to release a movie on the Odyssey this summer. And we immediately decided that we would take kind of a little semi-detour from strictly Greek mythology to do a couple of episodes on the Odyssey before the movie came out, and then also record a movie review, which is something we've never done, and I'm a little nervous about afterwards. I'm afraid that the only thing I'll have to say was, that was interesting, but we'll see.
I think, it won't be just a movie review. It'll be sort of a comparison of
the movie to what we've been reading.
Right. And how the various archetypes show up more or less, or.
Yeah, but I'm envisioning a more informal conversation. Anyway, as you, our listeners, may already know, the Odyssey is an epic poem written by someone, or more likely several someones, that we call Homer, and was probably written around 600 BCE. So it, like the Christopher Nolan movie, is very long. It is meant to be sung by a bard at a king or noble's house over the course of multiple nights. The longer the song went, the better, because it made for more nights of entertainment for the bard's hosts or patrons and their guests. And I imagine a larger payment to the bard. The more nights you sing, the more nights you get fed, maybe the more jewels you get gifted, etc.
Sure.
It's fun to note, if you do read the book, there are numerous shout-outs to the joys of a good bard. I'll just read a short example of this. It's in Book 9, verses 2 through 10. For I think there is no more complete fulfillment than when joy takes over an audience in the great hall, and the banqueteers are seated next to each other, listening to the poet, and beside them the tables are loaded with bread and meat, and the steward carries the drawn wine around and fills their cup to the brim. This seems to me the most beautiful thing in the world. I think we get a view into the writer's mind there.
Mm-hmm.
If the Odyssey is a journey home, and we'll talk more about that later in the episode, this is, quote unquote, Homer's home.
Right.
This scene. And in fact, the first words of the story are "Sing to me, Muse." So that's where he places us, is that we are being sung to. This is in stark contrast to the other great work by, quote unquote, Homer, which is the Iliad. And the first word of that is rage. This is a story meant to be listened to around a winter fire in peacetime, rather than a story by warriors for warriors. And in fact, most people don't think it was really the same author of the two books. The author of the Odyssey saw himself as a vessel for the gods or the divine muses. He was the medium for a larger, purer voice to come into the world. And I think this might explain why we've been listening to, reading, and watching this story for 2.5 millennia.
And at times without maybe even realizing it. It recently came to my attention that the film "O Brother, Where Art Thou" is adapted from the Odyssey.
And now I'm like, I need to go back to that and watch it again to see those patterns. So in some ways, the Odyssey is like a song. It has metaphorical language, it has verses and choruses. And a lot of what because we're not singing it, a lot of what reads as repetitive is much like the choruses of a song. And would probably be sung by the whole, it would be familiar to the whole audience or whole banquet hall, and it would be sung together because it's from earlier works that are put in. In other ways, it It's maybe like a Charles Dickens novel. They were also notably lengthy. A serialized story in short chapters meant to be heard over a long stretch of time. Probably most importantly to us, it's a great adventure story that carries archetypal themes of the trickster, the journey home, the proper sacrifices to make to honor the gods and to honor our place in relationship to the gods. Other themes include the relationship between host and guest, which in the Odyssey is also one of sacrifice and obligation on the part of the host, and proper gratitude on the part of the guest. And what makes a good king and a good husband? I find it really interesting that Odysseus is a hero. Mm-hmm. But he is heroic in his craftiness or tricksterishness. His main superpower is not with the sword or his strength, but his ability to get out of trouble or difficulty through quick-wittedness. He's more likely to persuade or trick than to physically overpower an enemy. The story also shows how his arrogance around these qualities leads to trouble. For example, he shouts out his real name to the Cyclops after blinding him. This leads to Poseidon's fury and the ensuing suffering.
Although I will say that there are parts, at least of the version I was reading, where Athena talks about his strength, not just his cleverness. Like, it's clear that at the very end, he's the only person that can string this bow. Now, maybe that's partially because there's a trick to stringing it, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But I think he also is, I mean, they use these names for everything to remember it in oral tradition. The Wine Dark Sea, Odysseus, that godlike man.
Right. But he's also Odysseus the cunning, Odysseus the...
Yes.
But I think, point well taken, right? All kings in that time and in that culture were warrior kings.
Right.
You were not going to stay a king if you weren't a warrior. Mm-hmm. Somebody was going to chop your head off and take your throne.
Right.
But that's not his main raison d'etre, right?
He's not Achilles, right? He's not Hector.
Exactly. And it's Achilles who says the first words in the Iliad, rage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, I mean, it's all of them, but Achilles is certainly, one of the main characters of the Iliad, right? And I feel like it's in some ways, a little bit his story. So much of the war is affected by his whims, but
Achilles' power and greatness and his foolishness and weakness are the story of the Iliad and the arc of the story of the Iliad, in the same way that Odysseus's cleverness and the shadow of his cleverness, which is stupid cockiness,
arrogance,
are what drives the Odyssey.
Now, as much as I would like to read the story this time, there's a reason it's called an epic poem. The Odyssey and the Iliad are far too long to read in podcast. At that point, it would just be an audiobook. So we have each read different versions, and in general, in my case, listened to. In general, there are quite a few out there worth considering. I listened to Stephen Fry's The Odyssey, which is more of like a well-researched dramatization and retelling rather than a strict translation, and he adds commentary and extra context and references what he's drawing on. I've also been listening to Sir Ian McKellen's reading of the Robert Fagles translation, which is quite fun, and my brother tells me that Emily Wilson's translation is very, very good, but if you're looking for the audiobook version of that, it's only available on Audible. They have an exclusive deal there. Mm-hmm. Of course, you could just wait and watch the upcoming film, but I really would consider reading or listening to one of those books beforehand, since it's impossible for them to squeeze everything in, despite the length of the film.
So I'm definitely going to put Stephen Fry's The Odyssey on my Libby so I can listen to that, because that sounds really great. And I'd like to do that before we do our next episode. I've been reading the Stephen Mitchell translation, which is both a wonderful, clear translation with a good eye to the meter as well as clarity of language, and also a great introduction. Same person translated the Iliad. He's really a renowned translator and writer, so I highly recommend that version.
On a quick note, Stephen Fry actually has a whole series that I need to get around to the rest of it. It's a quartet. He does kind of the way we've been covering. He started with creation myths.
Mm-hmm.
Then he went into the heroes.
Oh, wow.
And then he did the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Okay.
They're all as good as the Odyssey one I listened to. I'm, very looking forward to getting around to the rest of those. And of course, it's read by himself because he's
Stephen Fry.
Right. Now, I can't read the whole thing. We will, in this one, be reading a little bit from Odyssey, Symbols and Meaning by Claudio Patrini. Just the Polyphemus story, as that's what we're going to center on with the themes of this episode. You may have noticed my voice is a little bit different. I have a bit of a sore throat, so bear with me. Polyphemus. Odysseus's 12 ships, on a dark night when the moon is covered by clouds, land on a wild island inhabited only by goats. In the morning, the men divide into groups and engage in hunting. Then, until evening, they sit on the beach, eating the meat they had procured in abundance. The next day, Odysseus, intrigued by the voices and bleating of sheep and goats coming from a neighboring island, takes his own ship to that island, and with 12 men goes into it. Not far from the beach, they see a high cave, and near it a large enclosure built of stones driven into the ground and trees. They realize that the one who lives there is a crude being of enormous size, and that at that moment he is probably far away, grazing his animals. Inside the cave, they find many lambs and kids, and an abundance of cheese. Odysseus's companions would like to take the animals and cheeses away, and flee immediately to the ship. Odysseus, however, is of a different opinion, for he wishes to get to know the inhabitant of that place, and try to have a friendly relationship with him. They therefore remain in the cave, eating cheese and waiting for its inhabitant to return. And he finally returns, bringing firewood and goats into the cave. He closes the entrance to the cave with a huge boulder, then milks the goats and curdles the milk. When, finally, he lights the fire, he notices the men there. The Cyclops, whose name is Polyphemus, asks them if they are merchants or pirates, and his heavy voice and monstrous face terrify Odysseus and his men. Odysseus, trying not to lose heart, tells the Cyclops who they are and where they come from, and begs him to reserve for them the benevolence due to guests, according to the will of Zeus. But Polyphemus brutally replies to him that he fears neither Zeus nor any of the other gods, and to follow only his own will. Having said this, the Cyclops grabs 2 men with his hands, slams them against the ground, smashing their heads, and devours them as a lion would, eating every part of their bodies without discarding anything. Then he lies down among his animals and goes to sleep. Odysseus has the thought of approaching and piercing him with his sword, but he refrains from doing so, because then it would be impossible to move the large stone blocking the entrance to the cave, and he and his men would be doomed to die in there. The next morning, Polyphemus grabs and devours 2 men again, then leaves the cave to take his beasts out to pasture. When he returns in the evening, he feeds on 2 more men, but in the meantime, Odysseus had devised a plan. He offers the Cyclops some wine, which he had brought with him as a gift for the islanders. Polyphemus likes it very much, and drinks a great deal of it. And in the meantime, Odysseus converses with him, and reveals that his name is Nobody. Soon Polyphemus, under the influence of the wine, falls asleep. Then Odysseus and 4 companions grab a huge log of green wood that was in the cave. They had sharpened and heated it red hot over the fire, and now thrust it into the Cyclops' one eye. Polyphemus lets out a loud cry of pain, and calls loudly to the other Cyclops, who dwell on the surrounding mountains. These rush in, and, from outside the cave, ask Polyphemus if anyone has harmed him. When Polyphemus replies that nobody has harmed him, the Cyclops urge him to resign himself, for if nobody has caused him harm, then evidently his harm is intended by Zeus. When day breaks, Polyphemus removes the stone from the entrance of the cave to let the animals out, and, with his hands, touches the back of each animal to make sure that Odysseus and his people do not try to escape. But Odysseus has tied the rams 3 by 3, and under each ram standing in the middle, he has tied one of his companions. As for himself, Odysseus hides under a great ram, grasping at its thick fur. Once they reach a certain distance from the cave, Odysseus unties his companions, and, taking the animals with them, they return to the ship and set out to sea. When his ship reaches some distance from the island of the Cyclops, Odysseus turns taunting words to Polyphemus and proudly proclaims his true name. Then Polyphemus hurls huge boulders into the sea, which nearly hit the ship, and begs his father Poseidon to prevent Odysseus from ever returning to his homeland, or at least to make him return only after great suffering and after losing all his companions.
So this is really a perfect segment of the Odyssey to start us off in talking about the trickster archetype and how it's personified in Odysseus. I think it's kind of fun to note that Odysseus comes by his trickster nature genetically. He's the grandson of Autolycus, who is the most accomplished human liar and thief in the world. Autolycus had been granted these gifts by Hermes himself. It's also worth noting that Penelope, Odysseus's wife, is also quite a clever trickster in her own right, although I don't think we're going to get into that much this episode. But that cleverness and the honoring of her cleverness is very unusual in Greek or Roman images of women.
And I will posit that that is perhaps an added element to why Odysseus is so desperate to get back to her, despite, as we'll discuss later, being offered a very nice position somewhere else otherwise. I think Autolycus wasn't just granted those gifts by Hermes, but was actually Hermes' son.
Oh, okay. That probably depends on which version you're reading.
Which would make Odysseus directly descended from a trickster god.
Which makes it even more fun as far as I'm concerned. So let's go with that. I'm going to just go back to Penelope and what you said about Penelope for a second, which is that she is really his partner.
Mm-hmm.
And she is able to partner him in ways that probably almost nobody else in his life can, because she matches his cleverness and she matches his capacity to use that cleverness in a trickster way.
Right. Very different from Helen, right? Who is more
Beautiful,
of a prize.
Period.
Mm-hmm.
End of story. Or any of his companions in the Trojan War who are all lunk-headed warriors, essentially.
Yeah. There's a lot that happens before that Polyphemus story, but it's not just that instance that has, I think that sets Poseidon against Odysseus, but it's actually his patron, Athena, who kicks this whole thing off of saying, hey, they're not giving proper offering, proper sacrifice after their victory in Troy, even though this is Athena's victory as well, Odysseus being her champion, she wants to see them delayed. And I mean, it's kind of the fickleness of the gods, but there are rules.
Right. I mean, fickle, but if you treat them with honor and respect, it will be returned. And if you fail to treat them, that's next episode. Sorry, I'm getting diverted. But yeah, this is the one that sets up Poseidon's rage at Odysseus and really makes his life miserable.
Yeah, Poseidon really has it out for him.
Exactly. Athena loves him no matter what. Poseidon does not love him. And if he just kept his mouth shut, he would have just sailed home. But he does not. Odysseus does not keep his mouth shut.
Which is funny because you'd think they're gods. I mean, the action itself, blinding Polyphemus, would be enough. But it is really, no, he could have gotten away with it if he had kept his mouth shut, and then Polyphemus would have just been saying, nobody has blinded me.
Right. And this kind of gives us that insight into the shadow of Odysseus's trickster. He's just so full of himself that he cannot resist taking it one step too far. So Jung says that the trickster is compensatory to the Christian saint. I would add that in the Iliad and the Odyssey, the trickster Odysseus is compensatory to the classical warrior heroes such as Achilles. So maybe another way of looking at it is that the trickster archetype is the archetypal core of the collective shadow. So whatever our collective persona may be at a certain time, the trickster is going to be the shadow for that collective. So in Greek times, the persona was the warrior, the hero, and we have the cleverness and tricksiness is in the shadow. In, say, a fully maybe medieval Christian culture, the collective persona is saintliness, goodness, purity, and the jester and the sexuality of the trickster. All of that is going to be collective shadow. Trickster is at his or her and her most terrifying when she is unconscious. While Trickster is not evil when he is unconscious, he does atrocious things. It's hard not to see him as evil. Perhaps most importantly, though, tricksters are funny. They're either laughing at others or being laughed at. If you are not funny, you're not a trickster. You're something else.
Yeah, I would say that the trickster that people are probably most familiar with in modern day is Loki. Not just for the Norse mythology, but
the Marvel
character. A good part of that is because the actor does an excellent job. I'm blanking on his name at the moment, but you know, he's one of those people who's like, I could play this role forever.
Right. You really believe him.
And absolutely has those elements of arrogance,
cruelty.
Yep, gets in his own way.
Funny.
You know, a lot of his arc is Thor trying to see the best in him to make him better.
And every once in a while, he is better.
Right. Yeah. Spoilers for the Avengers Infinity War. Loki has a very heroic act in that film, sacrificing himself, that was probably hubris. I think he expected it to work. He was arrogant, but it still was brave in a fashion.
And I would say that the Marvel Loki and also in the TV series was very lovable.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, except at his most cruel and most atrocious, you are fond of him. You want him to get out of whatever trouble he's gotten into.
Right.
Which is just like Athena and Odysseus.
And I think tricksters often have this anti-hero role. I am not intimately familiar, but I know that Coyote in a lot of
indigenous
stories has that thing of not exactly being bad, not exactly being good.
I mean, and in fact, Jung talks a lot about Coyote in his essay on the trickster archetype. And what he says is that what you see in the arc of those stories is at the start of them, Coyote is a fool. He like cuts off body parts of his own body. And I mean, he's really a fool and a buffoon and cruel. But slowly over the arc of the stories, Coyote becomes more conscious. And I need to stop just using the word he, because tricksters are almost always hermaphroditic, including Coyote and Hermes.
Well, they're often shapeshifters, which if you are a shapeshifter, I think that always begs the question, well, what is your base state?
Exactly. When I think with a trickster, we won't get to know. They don't necessarily have a base state. So as Coyote goes through the consequences of all of his foolish actions and cruel actions, Coyote becomes more conscious and becomes part of what educates and expands the consciousness of the people who are listening to the story. And that's the ultimate goal of the trickster archetype, is this, to become more conscious, and through becoming more conscious, to be transformed from that which is simply either ridiculous or lousy to something salvational.
And I wonder, since you were saying earlier that trickster goes hand in hand with suffering, and I wonder whether the suffering is that developmental activator that sort of brings them into starting worse and then growing over time, or...
Which would be archetypal, right? Isn't that true for all of us?
Yeah. There's a saying that is, tragedy breeds innovation, something like that. That might not be the exact wording, but basically, whenever people are in hard times... is when
creative, transformational stuff happens. Yeah. So another contemporary trickster is... that really, I think, also illustrates all of this, is Natasha Lyonne in Russian Doll, in the
Netflix show.
Yeah, series, which I really recommend if you're interested in tricksters, and also if you're just interested in an amazing show. But in Russian Doll, Natasha Lyonne uses the repetition of time. I'll back up. Starts off, she's at a birthday party for herself. She's treating everybody, including the person who threw the party for her, disrespectfully. She's sarcastic. She's super funny because she's Natasha Lyonne, but mean, thoughtless, arrogant, just, and shut off, deeply, deeply shut off from feelings, just like Odysseus at his worst, or Loki at his worst. And she leaves the party and dies. And then the next episode starts with her coming back to life in the same day, coming back into the same party.
Groundhog Day situation.
Groundhog Day. But each time she goes through it, she dies in a different way. And generally lives a little longer. And well, it's not really clear till close to the end that she's learning anything from this, but she is. And particularly, she's learning about care and relationships, love. Natasha Lyonne is using this repetition, compulsion, and death as a metaphor for addiction. And the series is a metaphor for recovery from addiction, but it's also a really beautiful look at a trickster. I mean, has all of the elements of smart, funny, cruel, self-sabotaging, and slow, extremely painful, frightening, maybe won't happen at all, transformation to become somebody who not only can save herself, but saves somebody else. So really perfect trickster arc. Again, highly recommend it. So back to the story. Athena, Odysseus' divine champion, recognizes Odysseus for the liar and sneak that he is, and she loves him for it. She describes him as swindler, daredevil, cheat, king of liars, loves tricks and tales from the bottom of your treacherous heart.
Kind words.
Yeah, exactly. But in the same speech, she says, you are the greatest of mortals in judgment and eloquence.
Yeah.
I think Odysseus, in the story of Polyphemus that Reza just read, shows himself in the full flower of his trickster nature.
Yeah. He holds back the rest of his crew who want to just steal. They want to be bad guests.
Right.
And just steal from the Cyclops and then get out of there
Right.
because they are scared of this thing. But there's this combination of he's curious about the Cyclops. He's never met one before.
Which is, we forgot to mention that, but that is a key Trickster characteristic, is insatiable curiosity.
Mm-hmm. And he wants to go about things the right way. This is perhaps one of the reasons that Athena favors him, right? Is like, even in this moment, he tries to give offerings to Cyclops, right? To Polyphemus, and say, we brought you this wine. And it's not in that summary, but the wine was actually a gift to Odysseus for saving, I think, a priest of Apollo who was going to be killed, and back in sort of the end of the Trojan War. And he gives him all this wine, and it's very, very strong. It's supposed to be diluted at a like 20-to-1 ratio with water or something. And so that's why it is strong enough to knock out even Polyphemus. I think in all kinds of versions, you can really get his eloquence that he's able to convince Polyphemus to sort of feel totally the one in control, empowered by the situation long enough for him to be able to trick him. There's a lot of sacrifice in that. He loses a lot of men.
That happens over and over again. It's clear, and this is one of the positive aspects of Odysseus, that he really wants to save his men. And his grief at repeatedly not being able to is very genuine. I think in the Polyphemus story, we see the cleverness, the sneakiness, the cruelty, and most importantly, the arrogance that leads to him being trapped in his own trick.
Yeah, I think the version I read, his men are begging him to shut up when they're on the ships and they're sailing away. And he says one thing without giving away his name yet, just sort of taunting Polyphemus. And when the boulder crashes into the ocean and makes this great big wave, they're like, please, please be quiet. That almost hit us. And then he gives, let it be known that it was Odysseus who bested you. And they don't get hit by a boulder, but kind of far worse.
Right, they get hit by Poseidon for the rest of the story.
Yeah.
So Stephen Mitchell, in his introduction to his translation of the Odyssey, says, and this is a quote, "But however true or untrue his tales beneath all Odysseus's duplicity and cunning, there is a desperate homesickness." I would like to spend some time with the theme of the journey home, since it's one that resonates really strongly with me. Home, for both me and probably everybody else and Odysseus, has multiple layers. There's a sense of a physical home, a home that resides in relationships, in our love relationships, relationships to family, a home that is in the familiarity of ritual, language, and customs. Quick aside, I remember on my honeymoon, we spent some time in England where we totally knew the language.
Right.
But we didn't really know the rituals, the customs, and it was such a relief to get off the plane in New York and just intuitively understand everything. And then finally, there's a deep spiritual or archetypal sense of ultimate home, like home with all in caps. Beyond all of Odysseus's cleverness and tricks, he is a man who is profoundly homesick.
Yeah, when Calypso, because the story, again, really recommend reading the whole book, is sort of told in this reverse. You jump in the middle where he's not quite home yet, but then he's regaling people with tales of his time at these other places. But it kind of jumps in with Calypso is ordered by Zeus on Athena's pleading to send Odysseus home. But she asks him why he won't stay with her. Isn't a goddess's beauty incomparable to immortals? She could make him immortal too. And she's completely baffled that Odysseus would want to return to Penelope in Ithaca. And I think he also adds that, Ithaca is not a nice place. it's kind of mountainous and
rocky,
dry,
hard to
right.
farm. Yeah.
Right. But he still wants to return there. And I think that's just it. He's deeply homesick. And like I mentioned earlier, I think Penelope has this cleverness to her that just is his partner. And I can relate to having that person who's sort of is the embodiment of that home, however imperfect.
This sense of homesickness pulls at something really close to my core. I think, like Odysseus through most of the book, I'm always a little homesick. I always feel a little bit other, a little outside, and there's just this sense of yearning for a place that feels like my true home. And this is true for me even in times of my deepest joy and connection. I have a sense that this world is not my true home. This is really evoked for me by Jack White's version of Wayfaring Stranger. So Jack White's version, it's a traditional song, but Jack White's version starts off, I am a poor wayfaring stranger, traveling through this world alone. There is no sickness, toil, nor danger in that fair land to which I go. I know dark clouds will hover o'er me. I know my pathway is rough and steep, but golden fields lie out before me where weary eyes no more will weep. And it ends with, I'll soon be free from every trial. This form shall rest beneath the sod. I'm going home to see my Savior. I'm going home no more to roam. I am just going over Jordan. I'm just going over home. And I think that clearly conveys that home is not to be found for Jack White and probably for me and I'm sure for others, not to be found in this world. It is something in another place, another way of being. It's not a physical home, but something that's deeper and more permanent.
I think I'd like to believe that I could make any place into my home as long as I have the right people with me. And to some extent, that's true. You know, I started to feel at home living in Philadelphia, and whenever I visit my grandmother, I feel at home because she raised me. But I can't deny that when we made the decision to come back to Cleveland from Philadelphia, there was just sort of this return to form, like coziness.
To my place.
Right, because I grew up here.
Right. And I think one of the reasons that I never feel quite at home is that I moved so much growing up. I lived in New York, Boston, rural Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., and finally settled in Cleveland. And I think as a result, unlike you, Reza, no physical place has a complete sense of home for me. Although by now, Cleveland, my house in Cleveland, have a lot of that. Like, right. I love the fact that I can find my way around my house in total darkness,
And I have sort of the opposite experience. I spent my entire childhood in one house. And even when I was in university, I commuted from that house for a number of years. My family really valued travel, and so I'm quite comfortable with being in other places for extended periods of time that I'm not familiar with.
Navigating unfamiliar places. Yes, you were great in Zurich last summer.
And I think I could make a new home somewhere else with my family if I had to. But yeah, something about this city, it's just feels like home.
Unlike me, Odysseus speaks of his yearning for the physical landscape of his home with frequency and great poignancy. He says, I know of no place that is sweeter than my own country. He's constantly yearning to go home, even as the gods keep him wandering in sorrow.
And yeah, I can relate to that because even though there's great cities that just have so much more going on, and I know I would have a good time living there, something about the place I grew up just sort of calls to me. And I imagine that would be even more true in a time when traveling always meant a great deal of investment and a great deal of danger.
Right. You inherently not being in your own hearth and home was existentially risky.
Right.
I think it's worth noting that by the book's end, Odysseus has been absent from his home for almost half his life. But even so, and even with the divine charms of Calypso and her offer to make him mortal, at the very beginning of the story, with her soft, insidious words, tries to entice him and make him forget his homeland. But Odysseus, heartsick to glimpse even a wisp of smoke from his own chimneys, longs to die. At the start of the story, Odysseus has spent 7 years in what should be paradise. It is beautiful, he is fed wonderful food, great wine, lots of sex with a goddess. But he experiences himself as a hopeless prisoner. He wants to return to his wife and hearth more than he wants to be immortal. And really, the rest of the story is his journey home.
It's quite disorienting, I think, when you hear that the Trojan War was 10 years and then his journey home was 10 years, but actually 7 of those 10 going home was spent with Calypso in lavish comfort. Again, because abstractly, you might not think of that as suffering. That you're attended to, you eat great food, you have...
And it really doesn't make up a big part of the story because there's not much adventure
Right.
there.
Yeah.
There's not
Nothing's
much
happening.
Right, exactly.
He's just stuck. And yeah, when you are homesick, I think the implication is like, no matter how well you are treated and cared for, you still long for that home.
Your place.
And it's something that I also find kind of remarkable is he does not know his son.
Right.
Telemachus was a baby when he left.
Right.
So he's been away 20 years by the time he gets home. And Telemachus still has this, just from the stories, just complete faith and
that his
loyalty.
father will come. Telemachus is also reassured by Athena
true,
that his father is alive and will come home.
Right. But even so, before that happens, he spent the majority of his life just hearing stories about his father and not knowing him.
Right. And like Penelope, just holds on.
Mm-hmm.
Provides that anchor for Odysseus to return to. So Odysseus is also a story of the archetypal patterns of love and home. So it's place and home, but also love and home.
Mm-hmm.
Odysseus does not simply long for his physical place in the world. He longs to be at peace with the ones he truly loves. This sense of being with the one or ones we love as the true essence of being home resonates for me. It's in my marriage with my children and grandchildren that I feel at home. When I'm surrounded by the people I love the best, I feel like the place in me that's always a wanderer, always yearning for something out of reach, is at peace. It's in relationships that I find my true hearth in this world of time and space. And at a spiritual level, my truest home may not be in embodied existence at all, but something larger that I think we glimpse in the images, feelings, and stories such as those evoked by the Odyssey.
And I think that is where we'll conclude this episode of Jungian Ever After. We will pick up next time with discussing, admittedly, what we've discussed a little bit already. It's sort of hard not to flow into these different topics, but we'll be covering more specifically proper sacrifice and the host-guest relationships in the Odyssey, of which there are many. So, our intro-outro music is a sample of Sekilos' Epitaph with the Lyre of Apollo by Lina Palera under an attribution non-commercial share-alike 3.0 international license. You can find the full version at freemusicarchive.org, link in the show notes. And if you like what you've been hearing, please leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your podcast feed of choice, as it really helps other people find the show. This show will always be free and available to all, but if you would like to monetarily support the show, you can do so at ko-fi.com/JungianEverAfter. Also, Dr. Indina Davidson is a certified Jungian analyst, and you can find out more about her practice at adinadavidson.com or her Psychology Today profile. We'll be with you again next time, but until then, we hope your days are filled with imagination and storytelling.